I just have a quick question for Tim or Sarah. So I think it was in Tim's slides, but you were showing your existing portfolio that you're slowly transitioning from RGI to mixed income, but that doesn't include the new growth that you guys are doing. So I'm just wondering if you could talk about, are you able to recoup some of the lost RGI units through your new growth and what ratio that's in?
You stole my question. I just did a basic math and you were losing close to 2,000 units.
No, actually.
Where are these people going,
well,
please?
We're going to lose we won't house as many, and our goal is to not evict people because that's kind of what the situation we're in. But we provide 7,500 units. We have 2,000 rental units that CHC owns, 100% rental. We have 1,500 mixed income, and we have 4,000 social housing. 2,700 social housing units are currently planned to be as they are now. So what we're really dealing with is 1,000 social housing units, 1,059. We're growing by 1,000 units. So if you took the 1,059 social housing units and you said 1/3 of them might still be pretty deep subsidy, that's about 350. We're growing by 1,000 if we get the capital, but there's some challenges with cutbacks right now, and it looks like some of the capital we have in the pipe might not come, but probably about 300. So it's really about 300 desubsidy units today that might not be here. They're not actually households that are living there that will be evicted. They'll be units that may not be serving. So we may have a net loss, but we also have 2,000 rental units that we're looking to transition into mixed income. So more or less, we might not do too bad. But the reality is that the city of Calgary needs 2,000 new social housing units a year to keep up with the demand. And so I think the big picture is trying to address the big picture of supply and demand. As an organization, though, we have had to make a tough choice. We have a stand, and our stand is we will not provide units of poor quality. We will provide homes for individuals to have dignity. And so our entire strategy is based on how much does it cost to operate buildings and what's your break even. And we're gonna serve our break even. And so the challenge is the broader social policies on the bigger scale is there is a problem, and we've seen it all across the US with the Hope 6 program as an example, where we're going to mixed income and people are calling it affordable housing, but there's a big drop in the bottom of the number of households being served that are really low income. Whether you raise social assistance or deal with it on the income end or the housing end, it's something that's an implication that we kind of mentioned in our policy, but it's really important because the individual providers like us are dealing with this, but if we can kind of look at it across society and say what's really happening, that's where we're working with CHAC. Now we're also scaling up. So we're also growing other nonprofits. And so I didn't even account for that, but it's still not going to meet the demand.
Another question?
I think we want to get to some more questions, if we could, because I know what you're doing is somewhat controversial.
It is.
Very good. So we could spend a whole time on that. So we have other presenters that have some other questions that will come to them as well. We may come back to you on that particular question, but let's spread the wealth.
Hi. I have a quick kind of clarifying question for Joni, and then maybe a general question for everyone else. So the role of HUD in the work that you've described, what is their kind of financial investment? Are they there as a broker, or are they actually putting more money in directly capital into the projects themselves? Can you perhaps touch on that a bit?
Yeah, I'm not the finance person, unfortunately, so I probably can't give the answer you're looking for. HUD has been pretty invisible in both initiatives. And in fact, the housing authority in both places is severely underfinanced and low capacity. And HUD has barely been present. And by design or not, I don't know. And I don't know exactly the finance mechanism there either. But
no, that's okay, don't worry. My more general question is, I think I heard in David's presentation some basically worrying, as a backdrop to all of this growing inequity between renters and owners, and the degree of that. I think you had some quite startling statistics in there. And I guess I'm interested to hear from the panel what you think the implications of that are on for the next generation of renters growing up in Canada.
Yeah, we, from the 1980s on, Canada has become more multiracial, diverse, and we're not catching up to those realities too well in the ability to deal with housing discrimination and labor market discrimination. If you don't get a good job, you don't have money for housing, likewise education discrimination. So there's more of that going on that Canadians would like to admit. Americans, at least thinking Americans, admit it. And I don't think enough Canadians admit it yet. The city of Toronto is 9% black. 250,000 African Canadians, half born in Canada and multi-generational, many of them. Only 13% are recent immigrants, 10 years, that kind of thing, right? But I could show you maps of where renters live, which is everywhere. We have 50% renters and 50% owners. But black owners and black renters live in 2 clusters, period, right? A little scattering, but that's all. So we do need, so the income divide, growing income inequality, is connected with the tenure divide and is connected with the ratio divide. Yeah, no, they are, and we need to do better that way. Anybody else?
Other reflections or other questions? Yes.
This is for Joni. I noticed that the initiatives there in San Francisco and DC are being led by private market. I hate giving money away. And if I have a taxpayer's dollar, I like to use it multiple times, like any real estate developer wants to reuse their dollar. Where are the nonprofits that are being entrepreneurial to step into that space so that they can take that public dollar and use it over and over and over?
That's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer for that. Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer for that one. Sorry, I don't know if anyone here knows more. Yeah.
Yeah. This is an issue in Western nations. Okay, European nations have to deal with this. They have huge nonprofit sectors. So how can a nonprofit sector be more entrepreneurial? Is that your question? So yeah, and so more are being that way. But you can go too far, which is happening in England in particular, more so than Scotland and so on, where the nonprofits, right, have high salaries and high everything else, and serve a higher income, can only serve a higher income group, and replace a council housing, public housing, nonprofit housing with more expensive housing. So England is doing a lot of that has to do with the government and stuff like that, but you can go too far. So there's nonprofits that can keep to their mandate, as you're talking about, or they can go the other way. You have, that's a nice frameworks there for us to, I think, use and think about.
Another in the interim, I have this question for the two of you, and I think, Joni, you talked about equitable commodification, and it's just like a sustainable suburb. It's a little bit difficult to imagine and reinvent equitable commodification at all. And then this is also for David. You talked about obviously commodification in the Canadian system overall, and indeed moving away completely from what used to be even support for the private sector to build purpose rental housing, and obviously declining support for the social housing, which has been really a long-standing mission of different governments. So we are dealing with commodification, and thinking about the European examples, these systems have given away you know, a lot of the hard-won gains, like thinking about the Netherlands, where the system is also being commodified, and the housing associations in Paris and also in London are pushed to perform in a market-driven way, just like the Calgary housing company. So maybe that is a trend, but then if everything is commodified, how do we at least make it more equitable at all, if possible, I wonder. So if you could reflect on that. Equity and commodification,
Yeah.
which seems to be two absolutely
one.
opposites, yes.
Yeah,
So-
it's funny. I was in a room with my co-authors, Mark and Amy, just last week as we tried to figure out whether you could have a social good and commodification, and just kind of argued over it, and then left the topic and moved to the next frame because we disagreed on it. I think it's not clear, and I think you could really look at a lot of the analytical frames that I put up there and say, like, I don't know that you can just put the word equitable there and find a way to get there. I think that's our challenge. I think that almost by saying it and trying to articulate it and think about how we can more strategically ask those questions up front is part of the work for all of us in this room. And knowing, as I was saying, that in DC and San Francisco, that public property hasn't been sort of commodified for these, or at least these public housing sites for non-housing purposes yet, like knowing that is down the road, how can we at least think about what would commodification look like in service of residents to the extent that we can?
Yeah, thanks. I agree. But your question is a great one, but it needs slightly better framing. First off, 96% of all Canada's housing is commodity housing. Okay, and that 4% isn't. So I think a lot of your question relates to issues with the 4% into the future. But what is happening to the 96% is what I would call hyper-commodification. The not-for-housing things that are happening, and the growth in income and wealth inequality means prices, the housing market no longer serves that middle because the middle is no longer very big. So I would use the term hyper-commodification for that 96%. And then there is nuances of difficult problems. I don't mean to make them minor or something, but with that smaller sector, what do you do? But you're trying to do it in the context of what the globe and the nation and provinces are doing to the housing market itself, right? So there's no good answer for that reason, because there's so many forces working against you.
Pulling in different directions, and it's all about asset building, isn't it? Yes, there was a question here.
My question to Sarah. In the previous session, there is some thoughts regarding the linking the income with the land use. In other words, saying that this is affordable land use, affordable use only. What do you think?
I'm not a big fan of linking land use and income. I'm interested in what they're doing in Vancouver with rental housing and doing tenure. I think we have enough discrimination already of low-income people. I think everyone have the opportunity to live everywhere. And when you try to tie land use and income, it is going to create a significant problem with segregation. I'm very pleased that when we have developments go forward, people need to limit that to planning matters. It's not legal to say you can't live here because you're low income, and I think when you start mixing those, it opens up that door. And so I am interested in the rental though, because how do you get rental tenure? I'd rather deal with it in a market way than a planning way.
This question's for Joni. You provided your two examples, your case studies, didn't have success, I guess, in this policy and principled approach. In the research of the Institute, have you guys seen success in a policy kind of driven or principle driven approach to mixed income achieving its its goals?
I mean, I think my best answer for that question in some ways goes to the slide I showed a few times, which is like success for whom and what is success. I don't think that there is a agreed upon answer to that. But I think what you're asking is like, are there best practices towards this sort of more equitable, inclusive approach to mixed income redevelopment? Is that accurate? I think honestly, we think that Hope SF and NCR are doing some of the best work out there, and it's hard in a presentation like this to show that if you aren't really talking about all of the other cities and places that are trying to do mixed income redevelopment without that articulated goal. So in some ways, we're not highlighting all of the successes of NCI and Hope SF because they're not there. But if you think about Hope SF's trying to use this reparations initiative framing, and they're using a lot of trauma-informed community building, and there are a lot of approaches within Hope SF that really do go pretty far. Overall, when it comes to social inclusion, I think, no, we don't know good examples of mixed income places that are actually doing it, and we are really invested in, and I think many in this room are too, in trying to figure out exactly what it takes. I think we know a lot of the best practices there. We know that everybody needs to be at the table. We know it involves a real reframing, different timelines, different investments than typically has been done before. So there are a lot of promising practices we've identified, and you can definitely find a lot of that research on our website, and I can talk to you after this. But when it comes to like comprehensive neighborhood change initiatives that have centered equity, I cannot speak to any, certainly in the United States, that have just been successful.
A last question? Okay. A brief one. You're competing with the coffee break. Thank you.
Just really quickly for David. So I'm from Edmonton, and a lot of, to Sean's earlier point, some of the ideas that you get from politicians, and we have to assess. One that comes up a lot in Edmonton is the idea that if we need affordable housing so bad, why doesn't the city just go and buy up a bunch of existing private rental? Like there's older buildings that are on the market, and wouldn't that just be the most efficient way to quickly increase the supply of affordable housing? And so intuitively, I understand that. I appreciate, like, even just from having done that in a couple cases or seen that process, we're ultimately removing renters to replace them with lower income renters. But I'm wondering about your thoughts on the efficacy of a strategy like that, and if there are any conditions under where it would be good or bad.
I'm not sure I follow the whole question. Because when we had a social housing program where you would get a unit allocation, you could buy an existing rental building, and it would be an older building in need of serious rehab, and you would do it so that the tenants can stay or return, okay? Now, to buy a rental building and kick everybody out doesn't help. I agree with you. Sorry? 7% vacancy rate now. Yeah, so there are buildings that are available to buy, but then are you talking about kicking people out and replacing them?
Ultimately, if they're people who are in there above the income.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they are. The government is talking that way. Well, imagine the government coming around and saying homeowners have this or that, or some homeowners have too much of this or that, so we're going to kick them out, right? Right? No, you don't talk that way about homeowners, and some people are comfortable talking that way about renters, I guess. Yeah. So I think it is logical to buy older buildings and fix them up, but to displace people purposefully. I don't. Sean, you have more experience, maybe a better answer. Right?
Yeah, no, we're actually trying to end the session to get to the coffee.
No, I think you're doing great.
But David's just handed me the mic. So tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow.
You're not going to be displaced, Sean.
No, tomorrow.
That's all right. You can ask.
Tomorrow in Toronto, I'm leading a workshop, but actually a tour in Parkdale of buildings that we're helping organizations buy, rooming houses, older buildings as well, where people are there, but over time they will transition and move, and these are poorer buildings, right? And the challenge is ensuring that you're buying buildings that have quote unquote good bones. because that you're going to own that for 50 years or 60 years. But we're doing that because gentrification, we can't buy that land in that neighborhood, and the only way to deal with gentrification in those neighborhoods is to buy the buildings. So that's going, and Vancouver's got examples where they're buying hotels and all sorts of stuff, and I understand Calgary too. And anybody else in the room know of places where they do this? No. Well, we've given you some examples. Sasha, back to you because we're going to coffee.
No, there are lots of places where they do this, like they call
Yes.
them strategic
So
acquisitions.
I would recommend it in Edmonton. I will come to Edmonton. I will show you how to do it.
Strategic acquisitions, indeed, and then they could end up in redevelopment schemes. And some of the examples that we saw yesterday were actually an excellent illustration of that.